You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Matt McCarten is one of New Zealand's finest experts in the dark arts of politics. He and I have a long history on opposing sides, but Matt has always been easy to deal with and a straight shooter. He is one of my most respected operators in politics, and he's with me now as this week's Political Tragic. Welcome, Matt.
Morning, brother.
We've had a long and fractious relationship politically, haven't we, Matt?
We have indeed. I wouldn't say, fractious, but not personal. But we come from different sides of the field. So we engage. When we engage, it's normally over conflict.
Yep.
But always been amicable.
Well, that's the thing, Matt, is, we've never seen eye to eye politically, but on some issues we've contacted each other for assistance now and then, and have what I call a collegial business relationship with each other, and we seem to get on all right. And it seems to be something that is somewhat lacking in politics these days.
Yes. Mainly because this is my experience. Because I come from a trade union background, it's that I'm negotiating with employers. Some good, they're just doing their job. And then there's some who I deal a lot in the migrant exploitation world.
Yeah.
And if people have a belief system like you and I have, then you can disagree on the issue you are discussing, but it's not personal. What I find is what politics is personal when people don't really, this is my experience, that people who take things personally seem to not really have they're not really in politics because of politics, for political cause. It comes quite personal. Why would I get upset as an adversary who's articulating is what they believe in?
Yeah.
Right? Why would I get upset by that? Because we live in a civil society, right? So we're debating, and sometimes, I know it will shock you, Cam, but sometimes you might be right, and I might have to accept it. And on the other hand, that might be the same. You see, and that's where you're a conviction. We do conviction politics, so therefore it's not personal, And so, therefore, what I find in the middle ground of politics is like their political differences aren't that great. So therefore, they tend to make their differences quite personal. That's just pretty much.
Well, politics tends to be a zero-sum game where one side has to win and the other side has to lose. And I think that over time, both you and I have kind of ended up in the same place. You're talking about the middle ground, and I'm no longer a tribal Nat or tribal any particular political party, and I'm looking for solutions that are good for the country as a whole, with a firm belief that we should look after New Zealand first and foremost, ahead of perhaps some of the other countries around the world that always seeking New Zealand's input. And so I think, you and I have come from different ends of the political spectrum, and we're meeting in the middle, which is kind of ironic considering where we've both come from.
I think you should wash your mouth out as when you say the middle. It's a dirty word. We can't have that. No, I think you're right. I mean, we're not aligned to political parties. When you align to political parties, you have a certain collective responsibility, right? You can't be a free agent. You can't you can't have it both ways. So that when you're not, you can say what you think. Without that sense, I can't say that because that compromises the team.
Yeah.
So then you've always been a bit of a free agent, sort of anyway. And a lot of times I haven't been, but you keep your own faith. And you always be, you have discipline on you at times, but you should always articulate as what you believe in. And I think that you've always, my relationship with you've always been that. Don't like some of it, but I know that you believe it, and important, and I respect that. So, sorry, and I sort of forget that. I'll come back to what I started off with about employers. I will work with any of them because they believe in what they've got to do. Yeah, they've got a responsibility to shareholders, etc. And I've got a responsibility to the workers. And therefore, you both concede that you have a difference and a conflict of interest. You just do. But that doesn't make it all personal. That makes it is that you have a responsibility both sides. And I always say to a lot of the bosses said, look, I don't like this capitalist system very much at all, but I don't bring that to the table. I'm here to do work on behalf of your workers, and therefore we accept that. And once we get past that ideological stuff, we're just there to do the job. And so I've always been able to keep an integrity with the people I go up against with. Always can shake hands, and I think that's important. I do that in politics too, as well. That's why I don't get personal about it. I never have.
Well, I've always found you to be a man of your word, Matt. And, we've looked each other in the eye across the table and shaken hands on particular things. We may not have 100% agreed with where we were heading on that, but we found a solution to a particular problem and we've gone ahead with that. And I've always respected you for your ability to do that. And it's one of the things that I find missing a lot in politics these days, the ability to sit down across a table or have a beer or a Chardonnay or whatever your particular tipple is, and actually nut out some solutions.
Yeah, well, you and I are old school, right? And we come from old school. And the world has changed now where people can't be straight, and can't be direct, right? Because it's all about feelings. And I think that the institutions in society now have been inherited by the culture of, and I say this, and I don't mean it in the way it could be construed, but I come from a background of working class people, just talk straight. Yeah. And I've been with bosses, talk straight. But what I deal with in politics now, everyone is watching is what they say and also what they think. And I think that's made us a less tolerant society and a less honest society, and I think that's what I admire those who have beliefs. They actually say what they think. And I think that, but that's coming recently so.
Well, that's what's prompted you to join the Free Speech Union, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And of course, all of my mates on my left of the thing just say, oh, this is a right-wing thing, you shouldn't belong to it. I said, this is about an issue of free speech. And I've just been appalled at those that I have to explain sometimes to, and it stresses me to have to explain to them, free speech has always been an issue, a campaign of the left.
Yep.
It was always about, because free speech was muzzled by those without power, and that those who had power used the state to get. So with unions, I just know, the amount of time I've been silent in the work that I do, run off to the authority or the courts, get muzzle or orders on. If you look at the history of any country but New Zealand, 51, they passed laws that you weren't even allowed to speak to the workers. The workers were not to be given voice. I've got a Gazettener donated to me by the old communists, and they used it during the 51 Blue to do printing of their leaflets in the Hillsborough graveyard in the cemetery there. They were in one of the things, and they used to do their printing there at night because they were not allowed to have their message heard out. And all the tradition has always been that state stops those without power from speaking. And I don't know how the left has got itself into a position, or many of the left, I should say, I shouldn't say all, seem to think that free speech is dangerous. Just extraordinary.
Well, that's where they're talking about these, these hate speech laws. And I always say with things like that and with censorship and, all of the things that we saw happen during the madness of the pandemic, where the government of the day, and supported by the opposition parties, I might add, leapt on board totalitarianism in a heartbeat, something that you've spent a lifetime fighting against. And I've spent a lifetime explaining why we must never go down this path of the state having these awesome powers, because, I always say, be careful what you wish for. The right wing might bring in, and someone might bring in hate speech laws, but I can see the left wing being silenced by the very laws that they brought in.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I accept that when the pandemic took hold in the world, that people were scared, and that New Zealand was lucky because we were down the other end of the world, and it took a while to get here. So we had time to get precautions in. And whether you believe in the vaccine or not, I think that New Zealand handled it well, but then continued on where it was unnecessary, keeping things to that. So, but the thing which I got from it was the power of the state and how the left just marched in step with it. I found that extraordinary. And I think the thing which was really stunned me was when the campers, the occupiers, went to Parliament, and the trade union movement, passed a resolution and put out a statement supporting the police removing the protesters. And I was just stunned. Now, I'm not in the leadership of the trade union movement anymore, but I called my old union, which I founded, and said to them, we can't have a part of any of that. And the CPU put the statement out, and I understand my union went along with it, which I just think, where does a union movement support the state removing protesters from the People's Parliament in a civil society? What way would they're afraid of the people, want to shut them down? You and I both know, in another life, you see, you'd have someone like a Muldoon or a Norm Kirk. They'd go down there like Winston Peters did. You go and say, look, and you engage. But what we have is a fear of the people, and that if we don't like their ideas or what they're saying, instead of debating, we'll close it down. And
how hard would it have been for them to go and put up a tent and a couple of chairs and a table and say, right?
It would have been great, because if Jacinda, Saint Jacinda, went down there. No, but she was very popular, right? And she goes down with a number of the MPs and say, look, let's have a dialogue, and be respectful. And New Zealanders are respectful, they are. It's just our culture.
Yeah.
And, it would have been, it's like when Helen Clark, when she wouldn't meet the Māori Land March for the seabed and foreshores, to meet sheep, shriek the sheep, and wouldn't engage with them. You see, and all that thing is about disrespect. And you create something that you probably wish you hadn't. If Clark had treated the Māori protesters with more respect when they came round to Parliament, maybe they wouldn't have had a Māori party. Maybe, because they said, well, we're going to have our own voice. By Jacinda, I think, in Mallard, mishandling the protest, supported by the institutional left, I think they missed an opportunity, and I think it's built a working class resentment, which was unnecessary.
So, if you'd been Jacinda Ardern's chief of staff, would you have advised her to go and talk to them?
Absolutely.
Do you think that would have diffused the whole situation, and they would have packed up and gone home after a couple of days?
Well, even if they didn't go home, they're entitled. I've always protested, right? Because I think that bringing grievances to the attention is important in a civil society. All change that comes through confrontation. It doesn't come through persuasion. Every time you have a major push, it's because there's been conflict. And I'm not saying physical conflict, I'm saying it's a conflict of ideas and it needs to be expressed. So, if Jacinda had gone down there, she would have gained the respect, but also given respect to the protesters. To say, look, because they had a legitimate beef, and whether you agree with it or not, it was legitimate right to protest and saying that we're going too far in the misuse of the states. And there were anti-vaxxers and others, but that's just smears. Okay, yes, but there were a lot of other people there. And the people I know who are friends of mine who are independent journalists, sort of like yourself, they went down, and one of them, which you would know, he went down and just interviewed the protesters, put it up, and he got pilloried by the left, just for interviewing the protesters. When has that ever happened in left politics? It's just, it's like it's a different beast now.
Well, I find it strange, Matt, I have to say, that you and I seem to have more in agreement with each other these days than we ever did in the past. And
let's work on our differences before the end of the call. That way that we can get back to normal.
I don't know if I want to go back to normal. I'm enjoying having discourse with political opponents without any sort of anger or distrust or angst or anything negative. It's just conversation, and I'm enjoying it. And I wish I could pour myself, back in time and change a few things. Do you wish there's some aspects, Matt, that you could go back in time to do something different?
Oh, not more than once an hour.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about
who says that they have no regrets has not had a life.
No, exactly. Well, let's talk about something that's not too far in the distant past. In 2014, you were the chief of staff to David Cunliffe.
Yes, I was.
You had an election campaign where David Cunliffe announced at the campaign launch that this is what he said: this election campaign should not be about dirty tricks or dodgy deals or smear campaigns or even a personality cult. Now, that was on the 7th of July, 2014. Now, you were in a group of the Labour Party, and you came up with the slogan, vote positive, which at the time I sat there scratching my head. What does that mean? What does that mean? And it didn't mean anything. And it certainly didn't mean anything during the election campaign unless one thing happened. And that one thing was the release of Nicky Hager's book, Dirty Politics. So I'm just going to put you on the spot now, Matt.
No,
how much heads up did you guys have about his book?
I can't speak for others. I'll speak for myself.
Absolutely.
Zero. So you've got to remember, I went down there in the early part of 2014.
Yeah.
And I had been, as I said to Cunliffe, sort of at the time, I've been trying to kill your party for the last 10 to 20 years, right, from the Alliance side. But the Alliance is no longer around, so, I'm a working class boy, so it didn't help. But I hadn't been part of the Labour Party thing, since my 20s, so I didn't really know the internal culture. I mean, I knew enough about them, but so all those decisions about being positive and the inside sort of things, I had no knowledge of them because they were done before I arrived. So it wasn't. I'm not thinking. If I knew about it, I'd say it.
What does your gut say, though, Matt? What does your gut say about how close Labour was to Nicky Hager, and that the book was not just a mere coincidence, but actually planned?
I have no knowledge of that. And if you ask me anything, I know Nicky, in the early days, he never was close to Labour at all. And I never saw him in any late Labour events or had his name round his door, Nicky's mate. He always had this thing to be independent. And the conversations I've ever had with him, he's got nothing to do with the late Labour Party. I think Helen Clark with one of his books in her election, right, that she attacked him.
The Seeds of Distrust.
Yeah, so I think, and look, I'm going back, it's a long time ago now, but hand on heart, I don't recall in a meeting where I was involved in is there's any discussion about our mate Nicky.
Yeah.
I don't recall that at all. And I haven't seen Nicky for 20 years. So he's a Wellington sort of creature.
Well, as I said before earlier on in this interview, Matt, you've always found you a man of your word, and I'll accept that. You didn't know anything about that, but it just seemed to me to be a very happy coincidence at the very least.
Yeah, my experience is that parties, I know this will shock you, but parties aren't that smart.
Yeah, no, this doesn't shock me at all.
I know. Yeah, that the world, you think everyone's clever and they're sitting in bunkers and plotting things out and they've got their maps up on the wall and they kind of think a thing and, and people kind of think there's some master plan. Most of the thing is just...
Humbling.
Yeah, and cock-ups.
Yeah.
And because everything, as you know, in our politics or party politics is all committee-itis, that all decisions are never made. And you sit in rooms and you talk about things, but you don't really decide a lot. And most of the politicians I've come across are not conviction politicians in the way that I would like them to be. So they have trouble in making decisions, and, because they've taken all the things, what if and what if. I was a bit lucky with Jim Anderton. And I know that people have a jaundiced view of Jim at many times, but one thing he had, which was very good, he believed in stuff. He believed in stuff, and he made decisions.
Yes.
And I think that's the requirement. Richard Prebble once said to me, which I thought was good, he goes, the main thing in politics you need to have is ability to have courage and ability to make decisions.
Yeah.
Or to have courage and ability to make decisions. And he's right. Most politicians, and certainly those who are centre left or centre right, there's a bit of mush in there, they're not like that. Everything's committee-itis and everyone's all scared and they watch each other, but they don't really think about what do we do to help, to make our society be better, fairer, better, at least to have a view. So I have more respect for those on the right who have a conviction about something, then at least I know what we're dealing with. And you can make agreements and shake hands and get partly along the pathway, because at least you're fighting about an issue, not about where I like somebody. What do I care? It's not about us.
No, and that's the thing is that, I used to be on Martin Bradbury's TV show, and he always tried to have a guest on that was going to attack me and get Cam, and he used to say, "I'll get Chris Trotter on. He's very smart. He'll beat Cam." And it was always for Martin a zero-sum game. Someone had to win and someone had to lose. And I think it was extreme frustration for him when Chris Trotter and I, or you and I, or anybody else would be on the show, and at some point one or other of us would say, "You know what? I think Matt's right on that." Or Chris Trotter would say, "You know what? I agree with Cam on that." And I don't think he ever understood that by and large we all want the same things for this country. We've just got a different approach to get there.
I think that's right at some point. It's funny. When I negotiate as with employers, they say this thing, "In the end, Matt, we all want the same things." No, we don't. Because your job is to maximise return to your shareholders, and my job is to get a bigger return to the workers. So we don't have things in common. Well, we do, but we don't have, we have conflicts of interest. But in a society, what we think is best, we'll have differences on that. But I think what we want to do is reach agreements that we think will advance us toward or that. So I agree with you on that. So even though I tend to find I get better political education and be able to submit another view to others on the right, and that's a healthier debate than sometimes left, because sometimes on the left, when you're with your own tribe, it's sort of really a religious experience about who's the best of all, how we can be outraged at the most things. You talk to people on the left on my side, right? You talk about something like, if you want to upset the crowd and get them all going, just use the word Trump. The way they go, and then it becomes like how much we all hate him, but it doesn't actually advance us much,
No.
And I think what's important about debates is I think it's actually testing your ideas,
Yes.
and then testing their ideas. because you always come along. I always walk away from any event and say, what did I learn? Did I learn something? And if I didn't, well, what's the point?
Exactly right. Let's move to more modern times.
Mm-hmm.
You're the ultimate insider. You know how political parties deal with crises and cock-ups and stuff-ups and everything else.
Sure.
Let's talk about an implosion of a career recently in the Labour Party. And I'm talking about Michael Wood here, a guy who was the understudy to Phil Goff for decades, has long wanted to be, he probably still has ambitions to be Prime Minister. And he tanked his career over essentially a Big Mac, chips and a Coke.
Yeah.
Tell me from your perspective what you was thinking when you watched all this unfold, because I was gobsmacked. I just couldn't believe that someone would jeopardize their career in such a way over the equivalent of a Big Mac, chips and a Coke.
I agree. And, you put it down to hubris, really. You know that when someone becomes an MP, the IQ jumps by 20 points. And they suddenly, before they were an MP, that they were a nobody, then they suddenly become an MP and everyone all thinks they're important, right? And Michael's bright and works hard, ambitious. And these are all good traits. I like those people because they work hard. They want to prove themselves. And when he would see him, I don't know if he would have succeeded, but he was not shy about positioning himself that one day I could be the Prime Minister,
Yeah.
And then what happened, and it's just extraordinary. So I think there's 2 points, right? I think there is him, and you and I both know this, and I've been guilty of myself, right? You've got to have your personal life, or your personal way you conduct yourself, pretty strong, because if you're in a high-powered job, you're going to be under a lot of stress, and you've got to be careful about dropping the ball, and I think got a blind spot. It was about nothing. The finances and all the trust stuff and the shares are really managed by his wife, Julie, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think between them he could keep. I don't know how a family operates, like pillow talk and that, and they go, yeah, I'll do it, not realizing. I think that because he, when you're so important, you do all these really important things, that seemed a very small thing. But, as right, the Cabinet Office went to him 12 times.
Yeah.
Now, which part of those 12 times do you think, shit, I better get on with it, And he kept telling me what, but he wouldn't. Then 3 times they went to the Prime Minister's office. Now, see, and that's where I really think is where the problem is, right? I get with my uncle is arrogant and they think, I'm so special, it doesn't matter and all this sort of thing. Yeah, I will get round to it. Right? Not seeing the political thing, but someone like a chief of staff job is to look at it politically. And they should have gone down. You and I know how it works. You go down there and say, but the cabinet officer has spoken to Jacinta twice. And so she spoke to him twice. But you see, there's no baseball bat, right? It's all let's hold hands and kumbaya and let's be gentle with each other, right?
Yeah.
What required was a growing up discussion. Hey, Michael, the Prime Minister said to you twice now, I want confirmation on Monday that they're all being sold. Are we clear? Good. Okay, now here's the thing. If you haven't given me the evidence by Monday, don't turn up the cabinet.
Yeah.
Okay, we got that? Are we all clear? All right, because it's not about you, it's about us.
Yeah.
Okay, and just don't turn up the cabinet. Then he would have sold them, right? So it's a question of, and you looked at recently with Kerry Allen, there's something about soft management, and touchy-feely, which comes and bites you in the ass. I think that's what happened with Michael. Nobody went to him and said, get it sold this week, send me the sale document, and don't turn up the cabinet until it's done.
There was no Heather Simpson, was there?
Exactly.
No one who made just a mere, indication on your phone that Heather Simpson was calling you would make your insides turn to liquid with fear.
Yeah, I look, as you know, right, there's a bit of like all management, you create these iconic people because it suits the history. But
Yeah.
but you had someone, and she'd been there for a long time, and she was Clark's age 2.
Yeah.
She was saying, and so people knew that she was more than just the chief.
When she spoke, she was speaking for the Prime Minister.
She spoke for the Prime Minister, and there was what she had was there was a consequence.
Yes.
And people understood it. What we've had is under Jacinda's leadership, a style which worked for a while.
Yeah.
It worked for a while, and people liked it and things. But what you had was we be kind, right? People liked that, right? Being kind. But there's the other part of it internally. There needs to be some teeth too.
Yeah.
And you got to kind of, and then she'd have errant MPs, and they were just cautioned. And she put people into positions who shouldn't have been in there because she wants to be kind and doesn't want to hurt people's feelings. You're running the bloody country.
Yeah.
So what we had was MPs had no consequence. And so, you've created, and under Chris Hipkins as well, right, there's still an element of that, and he's had to pay the price for it because what it shows is weak leadership. One thing New Zealanders don't like is weakness.
We've never liked weakness. Look at the leaders that we've had. Robert Muldoon, very strong. David Longy, very strong.
Yeah.
Jenny Shipley, Helen Clark.
Yeah.
Very strong leaders. And then we've sort of got the mealy-mouthed ones after the Helen Clark eras.
I think that's right. And I think that's a culture which, it's got to have both. It's like, it's gentle or it's not gentle, because you've got to get results. It's like when I do negotiations with big employers or with criminal employers or exploiters, you always are polite and thing until you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a call with someone this morning and said, look, I work with good faith, but now you're not working with good faith, so now I'm going to burn the house down. And then I'm going to follow through. Like, you don't bluff. So there will be a consequence. So what in politics, these with Stuart Nash, who I don't have so much blame for, but there was 2 steps, before he's pushed down. You had
Claire Curran was another one.
Claire Curran, they get chance after chance.
Yeah.
And I used to say to some in the past, that sometimes you've got to hang someone in the village square so that everyone all understands. Is that you've got to, if you don't have discipline, and one of the things when I went down with the Labour Party in 2014, as you said, in the election year, which they were going to lose, it's full of factionalisation, division, factionalisation. And I thought, well, I don't know. I know, most of these guys, they all think I've got horns and tail. Good, I'll make it work. So my thing was to stop them from fighting each other, undermining each other. And my thing was simple, is that I would talk to them about their responsibilities to the people who put them there.
Yeah.
It wasn't about them. There are people who vote for them no matter what because they believe in them. And they betray them by working on their little vanities, who's up and who's down and who's got things. Now, that didn't work for most of them, but they all got the message of the moral responsibility. And when there was a leak or undermining, I'd go and see them.
Yeah.
And I'd call them out on it.
Yeah.
I'd say, look, this has been going on and you've been accused of this. I didn't do it. Good, I believe you. Good, excellent. Well, I'm not going to call you a liar, right? But I'm going to leave now and assure the leader it wasn't you. Oh, but brother or sister, I don't have to do this again, eh? We don't have to do this. And then it stopped.
That's right. But that's because there was consequences. And that seems to me to be the major flaw of MMP, is that there are not the electoral consequences that there used to be for doing appalling things. The Labour Party suffered that in 1990, after 6 years of the Douglas years and all of the things that happened then. There was a consequence for that, and it was a landslide election victory.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And that's what you've got to always be a bit. It's the sort of thing as when you do party politics, right, you have responsibility for, to do it collectively and to, if you sign up for it, you do your bloody job. That you and I are free agents now, so we can do whatever we like, right? We can say whatever we like, and that's fine. That's how we should be. But once you take a collective's gold and you work for them, then you have a responsibility. You don't go and tell lies, but you just do your bloody job, And and I don't think that some of the MPs, they actually think that it's a privilege for us to have them, not the other way round, And every MP should always wake up each morning and say, what a privilege to do this job. And I get paid to do it. Most of the activists, they do it as volunteers,
Mostly they look in the mirror and go, aren't I great?
Well, unfortunately, there's now, but most of them are actually quite fearful, I mean, I don't mind the ambitious.
Well, they make things happen, don't they, Matt?
Yeah, well, they want to prove themselves. So I like those ones because they can hold them to account. It's those who are fearful and all they do is scared about, I think that some of them got an imposter in here. They probably say that they shouldn't be there. I mean, this, right? It's about a third of the MPs do the work, do the leadership. About a third are okay, will be solid, and all be stars, but they get the job done.
And the other third are...
You think, what are they doing here?
Yeah, they're not fit for man or beast, are they, mostly?
No. And when you've got a party with a long tail, then that's going to show. You can cope with a third of big banks. I always say, well, this is what you get in a representative society that even the dumb are allowed to have some representatives here. So, that's how I can cope with it.
Yeah. So this election is shaping up to be critical, perhaps one of the most important elections in my lifetime, in your lifetime.
You mean unlike every other election, which they say the same thing?
Well, you're right. They do say the same thing, and I look back on them and I think, and this is what people say, if we've got to get rid of this government because otherwise this country is lost or whatever. And I sit there and think, well, they said that at the end of the Douglas Longy years. They said that at the end of the Jim Bolger years. We said that at the end of the Helen Clark years. And I look back on those battles and I think, compared to where we're at today, they were nothing. And I am genuinely fearful about the future of New Zealand for the first time in my life. We said all those things in the past, but we've seen governments use the fearsome powers of the state against its own citizens. And there wasn't very much pushback on that at all, and that frightens me.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised by that too. And I think it's not just in this country, I think it's around the world. And you think that's the main sort of issue for this election?
I think that we've seen a flipping of the roles, and you alluded to it earlier, saying that, free speech and freedoms and rights and all of those sorts of things used to be the wheelhouse of the left. Some of the great advances that we've made in human rights have come from, those left-wing parties.
Oh, no, that's right. They challenged the right to speak.
Exactly.
Martin Luther King, I mean, look at Mandela. I mean, they started off with free speech until the state oppressed them, then they turned to more violent means.
Yeah. And we've got this situation happening now where we've got, in the United States, we've seen collusion between the federal government and tech companies to silence people simply for having a differing opinion. We've had the advent of that here in New Zealand. We've got, this hate speech laws. We've even got individuals like Nikki Hager, for example, who wrote a book, in my case, because he wanted me silenced, because I had a different point of view and a different outlook on life. And that concerns me more than almost anything else, that we haven't learned any of the lessons that we had from history, where totalitarianism never ends well.
No.
And yet we dabbled with that and enthusiastically jumped on board that as a nation. And that concerns me. And for that reason, and it's my view that this actually really is important, because we're at a crossroads here. We can either continue down the path to what I see as destruction with separatism, with the inability, polarization, all of those sorts of things, or we draw a line under that. But the problem with drawing a line under that is just, well, who do you support? Because all the parties that are currently in the parliament were all on board with it.
Mm.
And it leaves me with a dilemma, like, who do you support? You can't even look at David Seymour and the ACT Party without being suspicious, because they were all on board, all of that as well. That the only difference was that they would be more efficient at stomping on our freedoms.
That's right. Well, you raise a good point, and I don't have the answer for it, right? Because I think it's been I think I go back to the comedian who took over from Noah. The South African comedian who took over from on the Daily Show.
John, what's his name?
Yeah. No. Anyway, but he it'll come to me. God, I don't know why I can't. Trevor Noah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so he said he's South African, and he said an interesting thing that when Mandela came and they had the Truth and Reconciliation process, and
yes.
no one was going to be sent to jail if they told the truth, right? And he says that created a very healthy environment where people could discuss things openly. And he said that racism was addressed, and people, we don't get into denial. And he goes, the South African political dialogue was better than America. Yeah. Because there's a suppression all the time. He goes, there wasn't that, first time. And that stopped the Civil War. And that's a clear example, by people saying, okay, we don't know how we're going to get through this, right? And they got through it. Not great, but they got through it. Yeah. And so my thing is that I'm never afraid of someone else's speech, and nor should anyone, right? And you just, if you disagree and you think it's really bad, then you have a right and you have a responsibility to engage.
Engage and challenge and offer your own ideas.
That's society it develops, right? Always. There's a lot of things can they go, okay, racism or separatism or other things, and that's a two-way street too in some people's minds. Good. Debate it. We're grown-ups, and we'll change each other's views, and we'll have an outcome. So I think that all debate is healthy, and the less you agree with, the better it is, and that's how society changes. And it stops us from undercurrent. It stops us from having a very unhealthy society of fear. And in the interstate, and I say this from some experience, right? I mean, in different worlds. In the employment world I work in, I'm constantly suppressed to protect those with power who've been exploiting. And they have all these agreements are confidential. It's the whole thing's a rort. So all employment law is done on no admission of guilt, and it's all kept in confidential. Why? And the thing is that if people knew what people were doing, then they would change. They just see this all as a racket. And there's a whole industry of people suppressing those who are poor and vulnerable, and they get away with it. It's just a racket, all protected by the state. So that's the extreme example, but it can go everywhere. Yeah. And so I ignore the suppression. So a bit of a history that you have in common. So I was even threatened with suppression order last week.
Yeah.
I said, I'll write about it. I don't care. Then they backed off.
Yeah.
I get about 6 suppression cases or, liable cases a year.
Yeah.
About every 2 months I get them, and I just send it back with F off, sort of on it. And I don't hear from them again because it's all to intimidate, shutting people up to intimidate them from speaking their truth. The poor or those with a different view from those who rule us The only thing they have is their voice. And they must have their voice.
And that's where the media have let down society, because they've become part of the state's apparatus.
And that's
in silencing points of view that they deem to be not in the best interests of whoever.
Well, what it is, right? It's a very middle-class thing of sensitivity and saying, I need to be protected by your ideas because you're confronted with.
What they're really saying is that those ideas are challenging and I don't have an answer for that, so you have to shut up.
I think that's an extreme thing, but yes. But I look, I deal with a lot of the lefties, right? And when I talk about lefties, I come from the working class left. You call a spade, and you say what you think.
Yeah.
What we have now, I think, is more the liberalism, liberal left, if you like, the middle class left, and their feelings are more important.
Yeah.
And I just said, but your feelings are not a reason that I can't say what I think, you know, and, you can't be protected from other people's ideas, but they think they can. And I think it's become very extreme and I think unhealthy. Oh, well, I think I know it's unhealthy. And I just will support all occasions for workers to have free speech, which shouldn't even be.
Shouldn't even be arguing about it. It should
because in the States, of course, with the Southern Poverty Centre,
the Southern Poverty Law Centre,
they used to defend Nazis, right? Because they said the right to speak is important for all people, including their main focus on black people, but they knew that by defending all rights of speech, that was the way that you could deal with racism. Tell the truth. And as I said before, for those without power, the only thing they have is their voice. And those with power want to close those voices down for their own reasons. And I think that needs to be fought.
And that's the reason why the founding fathers of the United States had the First Amendment being the right to free speech.
Absolutely.
And the Second Amendment was the right to be armed to protect the right to free speech.
Yes, I think that's been misconstrued a bit, but anyway, that's a whole different debate. But
it is.
I think it might be more an enforcement sort of issue than a philosophical one. These kids run around with machine guns, sort of mowing down their classmates. That's what fathers were thinking.
That's right. What's Matt McCarten's prediction for this election?
I think
to wrap this all up. Where are we heading, Matt?
I think it'll be close. I think that Labour, their two own goals with Kerry and Michael Wood, I think that's done them some damage the way they managed it. But I think that Chris Luxton has got a glass jaw.
Yeah.
I think in the debates, I think that Chris Hipkins will dominate that.
Yeah.
And all governments say don't put it at risk. I don't think that National has earned its right to be government this time. I think that the Māori Party are going to keep the Labour Party in. So I think it'll be close. I think it'll be within 2 or 3 seats, one way or the other. If Labour runs a good campaign, they could pull it off. If an election was done today, of course, that they'd lose.
Yeah.
But what Labour are good at that the Nats are not good at, they do early voting really well.
Yes.
And I think that may make a difference. If the Māori Party can pull off 4 seats, or maybe even get to 5% of the polling, I think then that's going to make the difference.
Well, we'll know in a few short weeks, won't we?
Well, I have to put $1 on it now. I go for Labour-led by an inch.
Well, I reckon it's harder to pick than a broken nose.
I agree. But I think you asked me to make a pick, so I'll make a pick.
Good on you. Thanks so much for coming on The Crunch with me today, Matt, and I hope that's given listeners a bit of an understanding about how you and I have operated behind the scenes to actually make some things happen.
All right, brother.
Thank you so much.
Okay, mate.
Like Morris Williamson, Matt McCarten has some great yarns to share about his roles in the trenches of New Zealand politics. I hope you enjoyed hearing his pearls of wisdom as much as I enjoyed talking about them with him.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.